The chill of the Carpathian forest bit through Victor's jacket as he limped through the thick undergrowth. His timber truck had broken down miles away, and he was forced to make his way through the treacherous wilderness on foot. A seasoned hunter and driver, Victor was no stranger to the dangers lurking in these woods. But tonight, an ominous silence hung in the air, broken only by the occasional howl of wolves. "Should have stayed with the truck," Victor muttered under his breath, clenching his hunting rifle tightly. His leg throbbed from a nasty gash he'd earned while jumping over a fallen tree. Every step felt like a hammer to his shin, but he couldn't stop. He knew too well what happened to those who lingered in the wild after dark. With the suns dipping below the horizon, the forest seemed to come alive. Shadows danced among the trees, and the chilling howls grew louder. Victor's sharp eyes darted left and right, catching glimpses of movement in the corner of his vision. The wolves were tracking him. He knew their tactics: wear down the prey, surround it, then strike. He reached a small clearing and paused for breath. The full moon was reflected off the snow-covered ground, giving an eerie glow to the scene. Victor's mind raced. His ammunition was limited, his leg in bad shape, and the wolves wouldn't wait. Just as he adjusted his hold on the rifle, there was a growl out of the darkness behind. He whirled round, heart racing. Yellow eyes glinted in the moonlight, first one pair, then another and another. In an instant, he was surrounded by at least a dozen wolves, low growls weaving into one another in a threatening harmonica. So, this is how it ends, Victor thought grimly, raising his rifle. He aimed at the biggest of the pack, a large, jet-black animal with eyes that seemed to cut right through his soul. But before he could pull the trigger, the black wolf let out a sharp, ear-splitting bark that quieted the pack. It stepped forward, head low but unflinching gaze, and in an instant felt almost familiar somehow. Victor's mind flashed back to a day 2 years ago. He had been driving his timber truck along a narrow mountain road when he saw, tangled in barbed wire, a small wolf cub. Against his better judgment, had stopped, freed the cub, and brought it home. He and his wife, Oksana, had nursed the little creature back to health, naming it Black Fang because of a distinctive black mark on one of its teeth. When Black Fang grew too wild to stay with them, they released him into the forest, hoping he'd survive. Now, as the massive black wolf stepped closer, Victor's heart skipped a beat. Could it be Black Fang? Victor whispered, lowering his rifle slightly. The wolf cocked its head, ears perking up at the mention of the name. Then, in a gesture quite unexpected from Victor, Black Fang stepped between him and the pack, letting out a series of sharp, commanding barks. The other wolves faltered, their growls dying into whimpers. One by one, they retreated into the shadows, leaving Victor alone with their leader. Relief washed over Victor, but it was short-lived. His injured leg gave out, and he collapsed into the snow. Black Fang approached cautiously, sniffing at him before nudging his arm gently with his nose. "You remember me?" Victor said with a weak smile, his voice tinged with both disbelief and gratitude. "Good boy." But the night was far from over. Victor's leg was in no condition for walking, and the wolves would almost surely return. He must have a plan. Lying down beside him to offer warmth against the cold, Black Fang seemed almost to sense that Victor had to gather his strength, and for the first time in hours, Victor felt some glimmer of hope. The sound of footsteps crunching through the snow snapped him back to attention. They weren't wolf footsteps, too heavy, too deliberate. Human voices followed, their tone harsh and guttural. "Poachers. Looks like the wolves left us a little present," one of the men sneered as they entered the clearing, their flashlights illuminating Victor and Black Fang. There were 3 of them, armed with rifles and carrying sacks filled with illegal pelts. "That's a big wolf," another said, eyeing Black Fang greedily. "Bet he'd fetch a good price." Victor's mind raced. He was unarmed and outnumbered, but he couldn't let these men harm Black Fang. Summoning what strength he had left, he spoke up. "This wolf's not for sale. And if you know what's good for you, you'll leave now." The poachers burst into laughter. "Listen to the hero," the leader mocked. "You can barely stand, old man. What are you gonna do? Bark us to death?" Victor didn't say a word. Instead, he locked eyes with Black Fang and whispered, "Protect me, boy." The huge wolf seemed to understand. He rose to his feet, his black coat bristling, and let out a deep, guttural growl. The poachers hesitated, their bravado faltering as they realized the sheer size and power of the beast before them. "Maybe we should just take the pelts and go," one of them muttered, stepping back. "Shut up," the leader snapped. "It's just a wolf. Shoot it." As the leader raised his rifle, Black Fang lunged forward. The wolf was lightning fast in the clearing, landing the man on the ground and disarming him with one swipe of his powerful jaws. The other two poachers panicked, firing randomly into the air before turning tail and running off into the forest, their screams echoing through the night. The leader, weaponless now and pinned beneath Black Fang, whimpered in terror. "Call him off. Please," he begged. Victor managed a chuckle despite the pain. "Not so tough now, are you?" Black Fang released the man, who scrambled to his feet and ran after his companions, leaving behind his rifle and the sack of pelts. Victor watched them disappear into the woods, then turned to his loyal wolf. "Good boy," he said again, stroking Black Fang's fur. But the danger wasn't over yet. Victor needed to get back to civilization, and fast. With Black Fang by his side, he began to formulate a plan, knowing that the night still held many challenges, and perhaps a few more surprises. Victor was a man of keen instincts, an unflappable calm one who could stare down a bear without batting an eyelash. He loved the forest, its raw beauty and unyielding challenges. But today, he had a feeling he couldn't shake, as though the woods were holding their breath. He paused, his sharp eyes catching movement ahead. It was a wolf cub, limping through the snow, its fur matted with blood. One ear was torn, the wound fresh and jagged. Victor's grip on his rifle tightened as the cub stumbled and fell, whimpering softly. He knew better than to approach. It could be a trap, the pack lurking nearby. But something about the cub's desperate eyes made him hesitate. "Poor thing," he muttered, lowering his rifle. Against his better judgment, he took a step forward, then another, his boots crunching the snow. The cub flinched but didn't move away, its energy spent. Victor squatted several feet away, reaching into his sack to pull out a strip of dried meat. "Here, little one," he said softly, flicking the meat in the cub's direction. The animal sniffed cautiously before devouring it in frantic bites. Victor took the opportunity to survey the cub's injuries from afar. The torn ear wasn't life-threatening, but it was clear the cub needed care. "Looks like you've had a rough start," Victor said in a low, smooth voice. "Let's get you patched up." Victor carried the cub back to his cabin that lay at the edge of the forest. His wife, Elena, met him at the door, her eyes widening in surprise. "Victor! What is that?" she exclaimed, hands on her hips. Her stern expression softened when she saw the injured cub cradled in his arms. "Found him out there," Victor said simply, stepping inside. "He's hurt. Figured we could help." Elena sighed, shaking her head. "You and your big heart. All right, bring him in. Let's see what we can do." They worked together to clean the cub's wounds, using warm water and antiseptic from their first aid kit. The cub winced but didn't struggle, its trust in Victor growing with each gentle touch. They wrapped its ear in gauze and fed it more scraps of meat. As the evening wore on, the cub began to relax, its bright eyes following Victor's every move. "What shall we name him?" Elena asked, sitting down beside Victor as the cub curled up near the fire. Victor thought a moment, a small smile playing on his lips. "Gray. Gray Ragged Ear." Elena chuckled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Fitting. Let's hope he doesn't cause too much trouble." Over the weeks, Gray grew stronger. The cub followed Victor everywhere from the cabin to the truck yard and even into the forest. The bond between them was undeniable, and the villagers took notice. Most admired Victor's kindness, but not everyone was pleased. Sergei, a boastful and jealous hunter, scoffed at Victor's attachment to the wolf. "A wolf is a predator, not a pet," Sergei sneered one evening at the local tavern. "You're raising trouble, Victor. Don't come crying when it turns on you." Victor shrugged and sipped his drink. A creature shows you its true nature when it's in need, Sergey. Gray's shown me nothing but loyalty. Maybe you should try earning some yourself. Laughter rippled through the tavern, and Sergey's face turned red. We'll see how loyal it is when it gets hungry, he muttered, storming out. As months turned into a year, Gray began to be an outstandingly wonderful wolf, his torn ear giving him a violent aspect. However, his presence around the village started to stir in controversies. Farmers thought about their cattle, children being warned not to play around. Victor knew this couldn't last, that at one point Gray's instinctual wildness would pit him against the fears of mankind. One spring morning, after much deliberation, Victor and Elena decided it was time to release Gray into the wild. They led him deep into the forest, where Victor knelt and placed a hand on the wolf's thick fur. "This is your home, Gray," Victor said, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "You'll be happier here." Gray looked up at Victor with piercing eyes, as if he understood. He nudged Victor's hand with his nose once, then turned and disappeared into the trees. Victor and Elena watched him until he was out of sight, both their hearts heavy but resolute. 2 years went by. Victor remained a timber truck driver, and the woods remained his bread and refuge. Life was quieter, though, without Gray. Often he looked into the woods and wondered if the wolf had survived, if he'd found a pack, if he remembered the man who'd saved him. One chilly autumn day, Victor was deep in the woods checking on traps he had laid for rabbits. Moving along through the underbrush, his foot caught something and he fell. Looking down, he saw that this was a crude snare with its rusted metal sunk into his leg. Pain shot through him as he tried to free himself from it, but with more struggling, the tighter the snare became. Under a hissed curse, Victor leaned his back against a tree with ragged breathing. Fumbling for his knife, he realized it had tumbled out somewhere along his path. Panic began as complete darkness settled and the wailed howl of wolves chorused through the forest distance. Wolves! Victor gritted his teeth. His mind was racing. He had been in peril many times, but it was different this time. He was injured, alone, and helpless. The howling grew louder, closer. Shadows moved among the trees, and Victor's heart pounded in his chest. Now he could see their eyes, glowing like embers in the fading light. The pack surrounded him, their growls low and menacing. A larger figure emerged from the shadows, a wolf with a torn ear, and Victor braced himself for the impact. "Gray," he whispered, his breath catching in his throat. It was the largest in the pack who stepped forward, his eyes piercing on Victor. The air paused for a while in taut silence, a standoff, man against beast. To Victor's complete astonishment, Gray issued a commanding bark, and the wolves retreated, the growling dying down. Gray approached Victor, sniffing the air before nudging his leg gently. It was as if he was checking the injury, assessing the situation. Victor felt a wave of relief wash over him. "You remember me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You came back." Gray turned, his body tense as he watched the pack, holding them off. Victor realized the wolf was protecting him, guarding him as he once guarded Gray. Tears stung Victor's eyes as he reached out, his hand brushing Gray's fur. The wordless bond between them was as powerful as ever. This first part of the tale lays the groundwork for Victor and Gray's remarkable relationship, weaving a tapestry of loyalty, courage, and the indissoluble bond between man and nature. Let me know if you like this opening, and it'll continue on to the next chapter, where the tension rises, and their bond is stretched in ways neither could have ever imagined. Victor awoke to the soft light of dawn filtering through the dense trees. His leg ached fiercely, and the cold had seeped into his bones, but he was alive. Black Fang lay beside him, ever watchful, his piercing yellow eyes scanning the perimeter. The events of the night before played through Victor's mind like a surreal dream. The wolves, the poachers, Black Fang's loyalty, it was the stuff of tales to be told over drinks, save that he wasn't sure he would live to see the next drink. The clearing was a testament to the chaos that had ensued: discarded rifle cartridges, trampled snow, and the sack of poached pelts the leader had abandoned in his flight. Victor reached for the sack, wincing as pain shot through his leg. "We can't leave this here," he muttered. Black Fang watched him with a curious tilt of his head, then nudged the sack with his nose, as if urging Victor to hurry. Morning stillness was broken by the noise of distant voices and engines. Victor's heart raced. The poachers had returned, this time far more prepared. He could still hear them yelling orders, words carried easily by crisp morning air. "Fan out! They can't have gone far," someone hawking yelled. "If that wolf shows up again, shoot to kill," one person growled. Victor's survival instincts kicked in. He couldn't outrun them, not in his condition. Hiding was the only option. He scanned the clearing and spotted a thick cluster of evergreens nearby. "Come on, boy," he whispered, tugging at Black Fang's fur. The wolf seemed to understand, helping Victor to his feet. Together, they limped toward the cover of the trees, Victor dragging the sack of pelts behind him. They hadn't gone far when the voices grew louder. Victor ducked behind the evergreens, pulling the sack close to mask its bright, incriminating contents. Black Fang crouched low beside him, his body tense, ready to spring into action at the first sign of danger. Through the gaps in the foliage, Victor saw the poachers enter the clearing. There were 5 of them now, armed to the teeth and scanning the area with cold, calculating eyes. The leader, still nursing the wounds from his encounter with Black Fang, barked orders in a hoarse voice. "Check the tracks. They couldn't have gotten far. And if you see that wolf, don't wait for my signal. Shoot it." Victor's grip on Black Fang tightened. He knew they couldn't stay hidden for long. The snow betrayed every step, and the poachers were skilled trackers. He needed a diversion. "Stay here," he whispered to Black Fang. The wolf hesitated, his yellow eyes filled with concern, but he obeyed, crouching lower into the snow. Victor reached into the sack and pulled out a fur pelt. Taking a deep breath, he launched it toward the opposite end of the clearing. It landed with a muffled thud, drawing the attention of the poachers. "Over there!" one of them yelled, running toward the sound. The moment their backs turned, Victor seized the opportunity. He motioned for Black Fang to follow as they slid deeper into the forest. The legs screamed in protest with him, but he pushed forward. He knew that stopping would mean certain death. The poachers quickly realized they had been duped. "It's a decoy!" the leader roared. "Find them!" Their flight was anything but silent, with every snapped twig and every crunching step sounding in his ears like a drumbeat announcing their position to the unyielding pursuers. Victor's breath came in ragged gasps, his vision beginning to blur from the effort. Suddenly, Black Fang halted, perked his ears, and twitched his nose. Victor followed his gaze down the track and saw, a little way ahead, a narrow crevice in the rocks, just wide enough to squeeze through. "Good eye, boy," Victor panted, hobbling toward the crevice. With Black Fang's help, he managed to squeeze through the sack of pelts scraped against the jagged rocks. They emerged on the other side into a small, hidden ravine, its walls towering high above them. The voices of the poachers grew muffled, drowned out by the gurgling of a frozen stream running down the bottom of the ravine. For the first time since the chase had started, Victor allowed himself to catch his breath. Sinking to the ground, he leaned against the cold stone wall. Black Fang stood guard at the entrance, his ears swiveling like radar dishes. Victor reached out to stroke his fur, murmuring, "We're not out of this yet, boy." The wolf's ears suddenly flattened, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. Victor's heart sank. The poachers had found the crevice. "They're in here!" one of them shouted. Victor scrambled to his feet, his mind racing. It was a dead end here. There was no getting out, no fighting off 5 armed men. Desperation clawed at him until an idea took root, a wild, perilous idea. He turned to Black Fang. "You trust me?" he asked, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. The wolf's gaze met his, unwavering. "Good. Let's give them a reason to regret coming after us." Victor grabbed a handful of loose rocks and positioned himself near the crevice. As the first poacher squeezed through, he hurled the rocks with all his might, striking the man square in the face. The poacher yelped and fell back, causing a bottleneck as the others tried to push through. Black Fang seized his chance. With a frightful snarl, he leaped at the doorway, snapping and slashing at it with his jaws and claws. The confined area played to their advantage, for the poachers had no room to wield weapons effectively. "Get back!" one of them shrieked, his voice dripping with panic. The leader's bravado crumbled as he realized they were outmatched. "Fall back! We'll get them another day!" he shouted, retreating with his men in tow. As the last poacher disappeared from view, Victor sank to the ground in relief. Black Fang returned to his side, his black coat streaked with blood, none of it his own. "We did it," Victor said, his voice barely above a whisper. He reached out to pat Black Fang, but his hand shook, the adrenaline wearing off and leaving exhaustion in its wake. For now they were safe. Still, Victor knew the poachers wouldn't give up that easily. They'd be back, and next time, they'd bring reinforcements. He needed to find help, and fast. As he closed his eyes, leaning against the cold rock wall, he whispered, "Just a little longer, boy. Then we'll move." Black Fang lay beside him, ever watchful, as the first rays of sunlight peeked over the ravine walls, signaling the start of another perilous day. The cold daylight brought little relief. Victor stirred awake to the distant sound of snapping twigs. His eyes fluttered open, and he instinctively reached for his rifle, only to remember it had been lost during the chase. Black Fang stood at the edge of the ravine, ears pricked, nose to the wind. The wolf's low growl sent a chill down Victor's spine. "They're back," Victor muttered under his breath. His leg throbbed as he tried to sit up. He gritted his teeth, leaning heavily on the rocky wall for support. The isolation of the ravine had seemed like sanctuary last night, but now it felt like a trap. The towering walls loomed over them, and Victor realized just how precarious their position was. If the poachers found them again, there would be no escaping. "We can't stay here, boy," Victor said, his voice low and firm. Black Fang turned to him, his yellow eyes filled with an intelligence that both comforted and unnerved Victor. The wolf padded over and nudged Victor's hand, as if urging him to move. Gathering his strength, Victor pushed himself up, using a sturdy branch as a makeshift crutch. The sack of pelts was still securely fastened against his side. To have left them would have left evidence of the poachers' crimes behind, an action Victor would not undertake. As they crept along the floor of the ravine, the sound of voices grew louder. The poachers were close, their harsh laughter and barked orders echoing through the forest. Victor scanned the ravine for any way out, but the walls were steep and unyielding. He glanced at Black Fang, who sniffed the air and began leading him toward a narrow path veering upward. "You sure about this?" Victor asked, following the wolf. Black Fang didn't pause, his movements purposeful and confident. Victor had no choice but to trust him. The path was treacherous, lined with loose rocks and patches of ice. Victor's injured leg made the climb excruciating, but he pressed on, fueled by the determination to survive. Black Fang stayed close, occasionally stopping to look back as if to check on him. They climbed up onto a ledge overlooking the forest. From this vantage point, Victor could see the poachers below, their movements methodical as they searched the ravine. The leader's voice carried through the crisp air. "Spread out. They couldn't have gotten far. That wolf's pelt is worth more than all of this combined," he snarled, waving toward the sack of stolen pelts one of his men carried. Victor's fists clenched. Something in his stomach screamed at him to attack now, but he knew that would be suicide. The poachers had guns, and he was beyond running on empty. Weighing options, Black Fang whined low, and his gaze fell upon a series of paw prints in the snow heading deeper into the forest. "A pack?" Victor whispered, his heart racing. If Black Fang's pack was nearby, they might stand a chance. But there was no guarantee the wolves would come to their aid. Wild wolves were unpredictable, and Victor's mind raced with memories of the pack's earlier hostility. "It's a long shot, boy," Victor said, following the tracks. Black Fang trotted ahead, his posture tense but determined. They moved quickly, the voices of the poachers fading behind them. The tracks disappeared into a thicket of dense bushes where the earth was covered in fresh paw prints and reeked of wolf musk. Victor's grip on his makeshift crutch tightened as he stepped into the clearing. Black Fang let out a soft howl. The sound seemed to reverberate through the trees. Leaves rustled in the underbrush a few moments later, and a pack of wolves emerged, their eyes aglow in the poor light. The leader of the pack was a massive gray wolf with a scar running down its muzzle. It approached Black Fang, the two exchanging a series of low growls and body language that Victor couldn't decipher. After what felt like an eternity, the gray wolf turned its gaze to Victor, its expression unreadable. "We need your help," Victor said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. He didn't know if the wolves understood him, but he had no other option. "Those men will kill us all if we don't stop them." The gray wolf regarded him a moment longer before letting out a commanding bark. The pack sprang into action, disappearing into the forest with a speed and precision that took Victor's breath away. Black Fang remained by his side, his tail wagging slightly. "Looks like they're on our side," Victor said, a hint of hope creeping into his voice. The sound of gunfire shattered the moment. Victor's heart sank as he realized the poachers had spotted the pack. He grasped his crutch and limped toward the commotion with Black Fang leading the way. Chaos prevailed the instant they arrived. The wolves attacked the poachers in what was a surprise attack from their speed and coordination to the men. One was on the ground already, his rifle shattered, and his arm bleeding from a wolf's bite. The others were fighting desperately, their bullets flying off trees as they struggled to ward off the never-relenting pack. Victor spotted the leader, now frantically trying to reload his rifle. His precious sack of pelts was forgotten at his feet. Gathering what remained of his strength, Victor clutched a heavy branch and with all his remaining might sent it flying at the others. It fell on the leader's hand, and the rifle went flying. "You again!" the leader growled, nursing his injured hand. He turned to run, but Black Fang was quicker. The wolf tackled him to the ground, pinning him with a snarl that left no room for negotiation. The rest of the poachers, realizing they were outnumbered, dropped their weapons and ran for cover in the forest, shrieking with terror. The wolves didn't give chase. They remained focused on the leader, who lay trembling beneath Black Fang. "Call him off, please," the man begged, his bravado replaced by sheer terror. Victor approached him slowly, his breathing labored. "You don't deserve mercy," he said coldly. "But I'll give you a choice. Leave this forest and never come back, or face justice." The leader nodded wildly. "I'll leave. I swear." Victor whistled, and Black Fang released the man, who scrambled to his feet and ran as fast as his legs could carry him. Victor watched him disappear into the trees before turning to the wolves. "Thank you," he said, his voice heavy with gratitude. The gray wolf barked once in acknowledgement before leading the pack back into the forest. As the adrenaline went away, Victor collapsed onto the ground, his body shaking from exhaustion. Black Fang lay beside him, his presence a comforting weight against Victor's side. The forest was silent again except for the rustle of the wind through the trees. "We did it, boy," Victor said softly, stroking Black Fang's fur. "We survived." The journey wasn't over, but for the first time in days, Victor felt a glimmer of hope. With Black Fang by his side and the wolves watching over them, he knew they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The air was thick with snow and pine, and the cold rock wall bit against Victor's back as he stared upwards at the grayish-white winter sky. His leg throbbed painfully, a merciless harbinger of how close to death he had come. Black Fang sat watchful beside him, his ears flicking toward every sound that came through the forest, silent now that the pack had retreated into its deep interior, leaving Victor and Black Fang to their renewal. "This isn't over," Victor whispered hoarsely, and he knew it in his belly. The poachers may have run, but they would reorganize. Men like them did not take kindly to the humiliation. Victor shifted uncomfortably, the sack of pelts still tied securely to his belt. It was more than evidence now. It was a symbol of what the forest had endured under those men. Black Fang nudged his arm, snapping Victor from his thoughts. The wolf's piercing yellow eyes seemed to say, "We have to move." "All right, boy," Victor said, gripping his makeshift crutch. "Let's finish this." With Black Fang in the lead, they pushed their way through the dense forest, on a path that only he knew. Victor didn't question where they were headed. He knew to trust Black Fang's instincts. The trees began to close in around them, branches heavy with snow, the air growing cold with every step. It had been a grueling journey. Victor's injured leg painfully slowed them down, while every jolt sent waves of pain through his body. But he pressed on, driven by a will he could hardly explain himself. The poachers needed to be stopped, and not only for his safety but for the sake of the forest and its inhabitants. Hours passed, and the light began to fade. Just as Victor was starting to lose hope, Black Fang came to a sudden stop, ears pricked and nose twitching. Victor followed his gaze and saw through the trees a faint light. Closer, it resolved into a small cabin nestled in a clearing. Smoke curled from its chimney, and the faint hum of a generator broke the silence of the forest. Victor hesitated. "You sure about this, boy?" Black Fawn let out a low bark, his tail wagging slightly. Victor took a deep breath and hobbled toward the cabin. As they approached, the door swung open, and a tall man stepped out, a rifle slung over his shoulder. His weathered face and sharp eyes spoke of a life spent in the wilderness. "Who's there?" the man called out, his voice gruff but not unfriendly. Victor raised a hand in greeting. "Name's Victor. I've got trouble on my heels and need some help." The man's gaze shifted to Black Fang, then back to Victor. He nodded slowly. "Come inside. Quickly." The warmth of the cabin was a welcome relief. Victor sank into a chair near the fireplace, grateful for the heat. The man introduced himself as Andre, a former ranger who'd retired to the forest to escape the chaos of the world. As Victor recounted his ordeal, Andre listened intently, his expression growing darker with every word. When Victor finished, Andre stood and began loading his rifle. "Those poachers have been a plague on these woods for years," he said, his voice grim. "But with the wolves on our side, we can put an end to this." Victor frowned. "The wolves won't listen to me. Black Fang might, but the others." Andre smirked. "They'll listen to him," he said, nodding toward Black Fang. "You've got something special there. Wolves don't follow just anyone." It was a simple plan but quite a risk. Andre would use his knowledge of the forest to track down the poachers, while Victor and Black Fang rallied the wolves, and they all drive the poachers away once and for all. When night came, they set off. Andre drifted like a phantom among the trees, his rifle at the ready. Victor and Black Fang went along a different path, one leading right into the heart of the wolves' territory. The forest held its breath as they neared the clearing where Victor had first come across the pack. Black Fang let out a low howl, a call that echoed through the trees. One by one, the wolves emerged, their eyes glowing in the moonlight. The gray leader stepped forward, his scarred face imposing but calm. Victor stepped back, letting Black Fang take the lead. The two wolves exchanged a series of growls and barks, their communication swift and decisive. As if in confirmation, when it turned to Victor, it seemed he barked like an agreement, and the pack was ready. They moved like shadows through the forest, guided by Andre's signal. The poachers had set up camp in a clearing, their laughter and the glow of their fire cutting through the night. Victor's heart pounded as he watched from the cover of the trees. The pack spread out, their movements silent and coordinated. The whistle cut through the air. This was the signal for him to strike. Surging forward, the growls and barks exploded in a symphony of vengeance. Chaos erupted, poachers scrambling for weapons as Victor and Andre closed in from opposite sides, cutting off any means of escape. Black Fang then leaped onto one of the poachers, snapping his jaws inches from the man's face. The leader, the same man who had begged for mercy only minutes before, was now firing into the night sky, sending wild shots well off their mark. Victor saw an opening and swung his crutch, the rubber tip thudding off the man's arm to send the rifle flying away. It was almost as quickly over as it had begun. The poachers, overwhelmed and outmatched, quickly raised their hands in defeat. Andre tied them up, his face hard as stone. "You're done here," he said coldly. "The authorities will deal with you now." With the dawn breaking, the forest seemed to let out a sigh of relief. The wolves receded into the trees, their mission done. Victor stood with Black Fang at his side, watching as Andre led the captured poachers toward the nearest ranger station. "You did good, boy," Victor said, scratching behind Black Fang's ears. A low whine escaped the wolf as he leaned into the touch. The journey back to civilization would be long and arduous, but Victor felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The forest had fought back, and for once, it had won.